Okay, so we are very happy to have Linda Markley presenting this session called The Power of Community in the World Language Classroom at PSMLA's first ever virtual conference. My name is Rich Madel and I'll be hosting today along with Jen Campbell. This session is being recorded. And so if you're tweeting or posting on social media, we welcome you to include @PSMLA and use the hashtag PSMLA21 so we can share and see all of your thoughts. For attendance purposes, we ask that your display name matches the name used to register for the conference. If you are unsure how to do so, you can send me a message in the chat and I will help you. But please join me in welcoming Linda to PSMLA. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich, and thank you everyone at PSMLA. You have done a phenomenal job. I can't believe this is your first virtual conference ever. It is like, it's been amazing, the way it's been organized and how easy it's been to just go through the process. So kudos to all of you. It was fabulous. So my name is Linda Markley, and I'm actually in Florida and near the Cape Canaveral area. And I have taught for, I don't want to say how many years, and I've taught everything from everyone from 3-year-olds to 83-year-olds, and I've taught French and Spanish, and I've taught math. And I work now part-time I'm a consultant for Vista Higher Learning, but this is not necessarily a publisher's focused presentation. There will be a lot of different resources and stuff like that. And I'm going to share with you what my experience has been in trying to bring together students, teachers, colleagues, administrators into a community to support and promote world languages. So being a language teacher, I am really focused on etymology, and I always start with like, what is the word origin? You know, where did it come from? And of course, you can see here that it, community, a public spirit. I really like the concept of public spirit and something shared in common. That's really powerful because a lot of times we ask kids to do things in isolation, or if we ask them to find something that they share in common with another, maybe we just have them think about it, maybe not interact with other people. And so from my own personal experience, I've learned how powerful it is to have a community in the classroom and also reach out to the community outside of the classroom to help support learning and motivating and being lifelong learners as well, to have the students see what the possibilities were. And so I came across, and I know this is from 1986, but it was some research done by Macmillan and Chavez that researched what does it mean to have a community. And they came up with these 4 categories of membership, influence, integration, and shared emotional connection. And so I started thinking about those, and I was like, oh, I totally can see that. And I thought about it in terms of world language learning and how we second language acquisition and such like that. And I came across an article also from Mindshift about life transitions. And so life transitions and rituals and using routines in the classroom and having each member, kind of like in elementary school, having like a role and a job to do, and kind of building that family sort of atmosphere. And so I took these 4 categories and instead renamed them or thought of them in a different way. And so for membership, belonging, pairing students up so that they feel like they belong and that they're not isolated and they can support each other. And then influence, validation. I came up with validation because that's the influence that they're going to have in the world. They need to see what their place is in the world and how they're going to make a difference with their language skills. So getting them out into the world and seeing what they're learning Spanish for, or French, or whatever the language, that they are going to be validated as to their influence in the world. So that I call stepping up to the plate and accepting that challenge and that responsibility. So for the fulfillment of needs, personalization and getting them to speak up, that's what they really want to do, is they want to be able to speak the language. I did, 40 years of surveys every year with students, and overwhelmingly my research showed that they wanted to be able to talk to a native speaker, or be able to survive in the target culture. And so they're not going to speak up unless they feel like they have something to say, and it's going to be from their perspective and their own personal viewpoints and needs, etc. And then we all hear a lot about that affective filter and how important it is. And so not just personalizing it and making them feel comfortable about taking risks with the language, but also that human connection, that we're all in this together and we all have shared human emotions and purpose in life. And so tapping into Maslow's hierarchy of needs is really critical. And I am sure you've seen a lot of hashtags, Maslow before Bloom's or Maslow above Bloom's. And so education has been really about moving students up the, Bloom's taxonomy to get them from just comprehension or to being able to analyze and synthesize and that sort of thing. But I think it's more than that. I think it's really trying to get them to self-actualize, to be creative, to problem solve, to feel good about themselves, to feel confident. And they're not, if we don't get them to those levels, they're not going to take the risks. They're not going to try, and they're not going to feel like they belong or that they are going to be validated. So starting with belonging, I would stand at the door and greet my students. I know now in the pandemic, it's a little harder, and the social distancing. And when virtual teaching started, a lot of teachers were like, I can't even see the kids. So I heard a lot of teachers say that it was really critical for them to start their Zoom meeting a little bit early and just give that 5 to 10 minutes of time to everybody has their cameras on, everybody can say, ask each other how they're doing. The teacher can, kind of interact and build that relationship. And I've seen an article recently too about the discipline issues that are coming up in the classroom, and how we don't need to have like discipline in the old way that we've done it, but it needs to be relational discipline, building that relationship and having students feel like they belong. So using paired activities is really critical for that. So what kinds of things can we do to pair students up? So information gap activities, and most textbooks have this, or you can get some on Teacher Pay Teachers, but that's how we interact in the world. Interpersonal communication. You have information that I want, and I ask you through a series of questions for that information, and you have information that I have information that you want, and so you ask me questions. So those information gap activities are really good for building community and helping the students to feel like they belong and that they're in it together. Doing things for paired activities, it doesn't have to be just a info gap activity. You can also do things where you have them pair up and recreate with role playing, with taking, almost every textbook has a video or whatever. Maybe pair the students up to make a new and improved video and give them some guidelines to that. Such as, for example, this is a video, and I had the kids do a new and improved video where they had to go in, and this was level 1, they had to go in and just change some of the parameters of the conversation. They could change, they had to change at least 1 or 2 names. Maybe they had to change the place that the person was from. So we're dealing with, starting in the beginning, the grammar and context. So nouns, person, places, or things. because that's just all they can do at the very beginning. And then they would record it, and maybe they could even act out a new and improved video series, but they get to decide. And then I would say, now you have to, because always there's these like useful expressions on the side, and we just give it to them and say, you need to learn these, but they don't, we don't really make them use it in a context in a meaningful way. So having them have to incorporate 2 or 3 of these useful expressions into the conversation. And maybe that's in the original video, maybe it's not. So again, having them pair up and do something in a creative way and empowering them to do it. In an elementary program, it might look something like this. Using the form of we is a powerful way of building community. So I can talk about, I do this, and then ask you, will you do it? How do you do it? But using things like, our identity, or, we are all a group and we're visiting this place, and having even a silhouette where the kid can put their own picture and their own face in there and relate to it a little bit more, using contexts that are more human and, about feelings or emotions, or and even having it look more relatable in this way. Board games, pairing them up and letting them play board games. I had a library, and we would have reading time where they would pair up and they would read to each other. So how did I pair them up? Like I said, I stood at the door every day and I greeted them, but I also had a basket. And in that basket, I felt like, Little Red Riding Hood. They had to pick something out of the basket. It was sometimes little objects, like, little plastic animals, and they had to pair up with, the same animal group, like, the lion and the tiger would be together or whatever. But also I'd have conversations. So I would take the dialogues from the book, from that video, and I would, and most programs have it where you can print it out. And so I would cut it up into strips. And so then they would have one part of the question, which might be, how are you today? What's your name? And then the other part of the conversation of, my name is Sally and I'm fine. So they had to find the person with the other half of the conversation. So I had a lot of creative ways of pairing them up, and they love that. And I've just had a student contact me recently that made a comment on Facebook I posted for World Teacher Day. And she came on and said, thank you so much. We did so many activities with compañeros, and said what they call pairing up with each other. And she's like, it was always so much fun. I got to know kids from different grade levels. And oh, by the way, I'm still married to the guy I met in your class in 9th grade. So there are lots of, it has a big impact in building that community, and then the kids feeling like they're a part of it and getting to know each other. So the storybooks, I would have them read to each other. So they got to pick a storybook and they would read, and all they had to do was listen. So if I read the story to you, you would listen, and you would listen for details, and you could ask me questions for clarification and everything. But at the end of the activity, the other person, my partner, would have to answer the following questions: who, what, when, where, why, how. That's all they had to do. And even in a level 1 class, they can put single words in there. If you want to have a graphic organizer, great, but I would just use that: who, what, when, where, why, how. Another thing that I did was I paired them up with these pictures. I was given a Lucy calendar every year. So I would put, I had numbered desks. So I would have 2 matching numbers, and they would tell each other a story about the picture that they had received when they came through the door and took something out of the basket. Also, I had a thing with class albums. So as we did different things during the year, so this was a Spanish 3 class, and you cover like all of the tenses in Spanish 3. And so I would have them do little writings and, about themselves as we went along, instead of assigning it as a big project at the end. And we would gather the writing together, and then by the end of the year, even with other things like this, the one picture here, these are poems that they would personalize. And we would study the poem, like the Versos Sencillos by Jose Marti. And so I would make it a close activity and they would personalize it. So instead of yo soy un hombre sincero, they would say something like yo soy una muchacha curiosa or inteligente or whatever. And so they had these personalized poems, and they're basically autobiography of their life on a timeline, because we had covered all of the tenses during the year. And they created this photo album. So we had a class photo album and everybody had several pages in it. And the cover page, as you can see here, was different students with an icon, like what icon do you want to have to represent you, which then we could have conversations about and get curious about. But with the other pages, they would have their pages with their projects in there, but then we recorded them. So they actually created like a class photo album book on tape. And what that served for to build that community was when they got to level 4, and especially when they got to AP, it was something we could pull out when they were struggling, especially in AP when they're really afraid of that exam and they feel like they don't know enough, they're not enough. And so we would get the class album out and we would have like, let's remember the fun times. Let's remember, let's look at all the things that you've done and what you've accomplished and what you know. And it was really a big confidence booster, but it built a sense of family and community. Another thing too is Genius Hour. I've seen a lot of this, and a lot of things that they're named now, like IPAs and Genius Hour and all of that. I mean, I did just from my own personal experience of learning how I learned a language, looking at it, and then how did I want to make it more applicable to the real world? Because when I learned it, it was memorize dialogues and fill in the blank with the correct form of the verb in parentheses. And so when I traveled to a foreign country, to Spain or to France or Germany or wherever, if the person didn't know the other half of the dialogue, or they didn't give me a worksheet that said fill in the blank with the correct form of the verb in parentheses, I was tongue-tied and I didn't always have the vocabulary, and I hadn't even been taught the skills, the strategies of using circumlocution or gestures or anything like that. So really having the student empowered and own their own learning and to have choices of how they're going to learn and what they're going to learn about. I also did that. I had projects where they would create things in groups. So it might be, for example, we were studying indigenous cultures in the Americas, and to give them a different perspective on things, we took a human approach to it of what are the needs, again, answering those questions of who, what, when, where, why, how. And they would be in a group with other students who were studying, so they would collaborate. They got to choose which group they wanted to be in, whether they're going to be Maya or Aztec or Inca or Toltec or any of the Taino or whatever the group was. And then they would be able to make a choice. And so that's what Genius Hour is about, for them to design their own learning. And even in our district, they have something called Genius Hour or Power Hour. And that's kind of the reason behind it, to empower the students. So I also created a bank of learning centers using different authentic resources and a lot of games to be able to pair the students up. So it was a little bit like the spoonful of sugar, makes the medicine go down. So they were paired up to kind of play and explore. And basically they were like IPAs. They had to do an interpretive, again, who, what, when, where, why, how, or look at what is here, and you're going to make up a story. You're going to create, I have a real world situation or context, and you're going to have to interact and use what you've learned to be able to, you're going to support each other. And I just did a few of them every summer. I would go to other countries with an empty suitcase and I'd bring them back full of trash. And sometimes it was even just on a Friday, instead of doing a center like this, it would just, I would have it, I'd call it trash picking day. And so I had a big Tupperware of just all these authentic materials, from empty wrappers and food containers to brochures and packaging for different things. And they could just come up and pick up, each of them would pick a piece of trash, and then they would go back and figure out what it was used for, and what was on there that they could understand, what couldn't they understand, and how could they get their partner to help them understand it, and then make up a scenario of how would you use this, where would you find it in the target culture, etc. And they loved it. So the next is validation. How do we get them to step up once they feel like they belong and they're feeling comfortable and they take those risks to try to extend their learning? And how do we get them to understand that what they are learning matters and that their contributions matter? They belong to this group, but it's not just belong and sit back and let other people talk or do the work. So then I came up with kind of, again, like the family album sort of concept, but it would be across levels of the languages. So here's an example of a survey that level 3 students again did, and I've done this with level 1 as well. It was just a much more simplified version of, there was a reading in the textbook that was about a survey of teenagers in Spain, and they had a graph and statistics and everything. So I said, okay, what are you curious about? You're going to create a survey about a topic that has to do with friendship or school or whatever you want to have, you want to do some research on. And then you're going to create a survey, and you have to give it to at least one level 4 student and one AP student and a second year and a first year student. So they would go to either end of the languages with 1 and 2, and then 4 and 5, and give them the survey to take. So those students had to take the survey, sign their name at the bottom, and then before they were going to do their report on what the survey said, like, this is what I found with my survey, and this is what I found in my research, and it had to be in the target language, and they had to print it out and show how they had taken notes on it and everything. They came up with a summary, and the summary, I didn't take all these and grade them myself. I, again, used CommUNITY. So I said that they had to get peer editing from at least one Spanish 4 student and one Spanish AP student. And so in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the markings there, and the signatures at the bottom, that's from other students editing very simple mistakes that I don't need to take my time and energy to do, and I want them to be a community. I also did something, again, not everything's original. I just take other ideas and say, well, how could I use it? That's what we do as teachers. And I learned a lot from elementary school teachers and being an elementary school teacher myself. So Flat Stanley, I did that with my AP students because sometimes preparing for that test was so daunting, and again, could just take the fun out of learning Spanish. So we created a Esteban el Plano, and I've done this for French and for other languages I've taught, and it's super popular. And I've done it for level 1 too. It's not just for AP. And I bought a little notebook and a little disposable camera. We were going to use cell phones, but the kids were like, no, we really like the disposable camera. I don't know though, if you can really get the film developed anymore, but I mean, I can take and print them off the phone from the phone too now, but they would have to put a picture in the diary, and the diary was written from the perspective of Esteban spending a day with them. So that's what you can see here. And so they had to write it, from the perspective of, hi, I'm Esteban, and I spent the day with Cecilia today, and we had a great time, and we did this, and we went there, and here's a picture of what we did. And the kids really got into it. In the bottom, middle picture is where they had they decided that Esteban was going to go to prom. So Jen, you were talking about all the work that goes into prom. And so they were like, he needs a date. And so they found him a girlfriend, and they made like paper doll clothes for him. And it was just, they really got into it. Also, Honor Society. I did something with the Honor Society where they had to mentor, again, the upper level students had to mentor students from levels 1, 2, and 3, and they could get service learning points for it, but also the student that went for the help would also get some sort of bonus points or whatever. So it was just creating a scenario or a situation, a context that would kind of help them to motivate them to get together with someone else and to pair up, but also to step up, like get the upper level students to step up and realize their responsibility and their role of mentoring the younger students. Some other things that we've done in the upper right hand corner is we also mentored. I had my students go and tutor students at a elementary school that had a lot of ELL students. And so they mentored them with science experiments. And then after they did that, the elementary students came to the high school, and my students showed them on the computer what college they were going to go to and what the requirements were to get into the college. And then they talked to them about, here are some scholarships that you could apply for when you get to high school that are scholarships for students with Hispanic heritage, et cetera. So that was a very powerful, and my students just, those high school kids just like all in the Wonder Woman and Superman pose, they were like, look at what I've done. I've had this influence on this younger student that may change their future. On the left-hand side, that's from our Florida Foreign Language Association conference, where we would invite students back in to talk about how they were using languages in their jobs. So the one on the top, he works for Google. He's a software engineer, but he's talking about how Google values that and values soft skills, and his language skills actually were a bonus to get him on a big project that was developing the coding that needed to be culturally sensitive for other languages, Spanish in particular, and he speaks French also. So we recorded them, and then teachers across the state could use those to promote and validate that learning languages is important and critical. Some other things, the Global Seal of Biliteracy, it's going on today and the next few days. If you haven't done that with your students, sign up for the Global Seal of Biliteracy. That's where they get to connect with experts, with other people that will again show them how languages are important and and there's also an interaction of using the language and connecting with other classrooms and talking about the importance of languages. If you can't do that, this ALC Bridge and also Noble, the network of business language educators. If you go to those sites, you will see that there's a place where you can sign up to have a virtual speaker come to your class via Zoom and talk to your class and answer questions about what kind of careers use languages, how they can make a difference in the world, become global citizens, et cetera, et cetera. So, but also reach into your community, reach to your parents and your immediate community and see if there are people that could come in and talk about that as well. So another way of getting students to, when you validate them and get them to step up, is to respect their differences, using differentiation, social emotional learning awareness, and using those strategies, multiple intelligence, all of those different sorts of things, having rubrics that accommodate for that differentiation. So and then making real world connections. There aren't many programs out there that actually focus on that, but Vista does have a program, which you can see here. It's Spanish Work. So if you teach Spanish and you would like to do some activities with college and career readiness and really help the students to see that what they're learning has real world application, you can contact Lauren, the sales rep for your area, which I'll give you her information at the end, and see about these books. So personalization, how are they going to see themselves in the world? How do they fit in? Building those relationships, tapping into that heart of theirs. So blooms for growing and blooming, yes, of course. Using authentic resources and scaffolding things, asking them to do their own evaluation of where they are in the learning process. So those can-do statements. We have a program, Encuentros, which has desafíos. So it's like little challenges, real world challenges as the students go along, where they have to solve these little challenges or problems, and to be able to go, it's a little bit, maybe a little like gaming, where they can go to the next level or the next step or whatever. Again, a lot of self-evaluation, differentiation, involving parents, having parent letters and involving the parents in what you're doing in class. If you're doing special projects, if you're having special guests come in, getting them to see the importance of languages. And so using can-do statements, like I said, personalizing the vocabulary. So we have all of our programs have a My Vocabulary tool where you can go in. I know Kia does that. A lot of other programs, you can put the vocabulary words in and everything, but better yet is if you let the students create their own vocabulary list instead of giving it to them. So giving them the context and the scenario and asking them to think about what kinds of things are you going to be asking, or what are you going to be doing, and what kinds of questions, what kind of vocabulary would you need, and letting them create it. And so that's, again, building that community where they're in it together and they're helping each other to imagine what it's like to be in a context and in a situation where they have to problem solve on their own. And so that leads to the humanization. Like I said, when I studied languages and then it was a lot of memorized stuff and a lot of fill in the blanks, I was not really prepared for what attracted me to language was that human component of being really curious and fascinated and feeling connected to all of these people that I was learning about through languages, all of the cultures, all of the products, practices, and perspectives. And for someone who grew up in a very small town, being able to put those lenses on and see the world in a different way, and my place in the world was a huge motivating factor for me to not just study one language, but to study many languages and then make it my life purpose and my life passion. You know, passion is, if we rearrange it, I pass on. What am I going to pass on to the world, to my students, to other people? And I know a lot of people are like, oh, heaven, don't get stuck in an elevator with Linda, because she will try to, you know, she has that elevator speech about languages and are you learning them and how important it is, and which has just led to a lot of advocacy on my part too. So travel, taking students traveling, having them and myself traveling, excuse me, and making connections between my students and students in other countries. There's an organization down in Guatemala called Actenamid, and that's the picture on the right. And I hooked them up. They are a school that was started for indigenous cultures or for indigenous students. And they started out with 10 girls that they rescued from being child brides to drug lords in Guatemala on the Rio Dulce. And now they have a school of 500 kids. And so getting them to see what it's like, you know, in other countries and to connect with those students. The Rotary, nonprofit organizations, businesses, and have them come in and do a career day talk, or even some take them on a field trip there and let them see, as soon as, the pandemic is not restricting a lot of those things. Bring in virtual guests. The gentleman in the bottom is an archaeologist in Spain, and he came in virtually and talked to the students about how important archaeology is, and kind of being curious about, what your surrounding is. And when you go to other countries, learn about their history and their people and their products, practices, and perspectives, so that you can appreciate what you're seeing more. We did an activity in the school. The passport in the middle was to try to get this community together of other subject areas to support languages. We had a passport activity, and also between languages, so that they don't become competitive. So we had a passport activity where the French, Latin, Spanish, and German students had to teach other students of other languages a proverb in that language. So a Spanish student had to teach a proverb in Spanish to a French student, etc. And as soon as they did, they would, stamp that part of the passport and sign it. The student had to sign it. They had to go to their subject area teachers, and they had to talk to that teacher about, a famous person in history who was Hispanic or French or German. And as soon as they made a connection and could talk to the teacher with some, little research and stuff, then that teacher would stamp their passport and sign their name. In the cafeteria, the administration was on cafeteria duty. So the student, when they entered the cafeteria, would have to teach the administrator a new word in the target language. And as soon as they did that, or greeted them in the target language, effectively, then the administrator would sign their passport. So that's how we got everybody involved in being aware of languages and how we're all connected. Again, using the AP themes, real world authentic tasks, and authentic materials. This is a note now, gender identity, and being sensitive to that. I know that's, in the forefront now, and diversity, making those part of our curriculum. Using the arts and music to make those human connections, absolutely powerful. Taking artwork and having the students see themselves in the artwork, knowing more about, the culture and the person who created the art or the music, or the poem or whatever it was, and to personalize it. Even with little kids, to do little arts and crafts. And I did this with high school kids too. And we made molas. And so you create your own mola, and what have you put into it? What does it represent? How does it represent you? Etc. So just, they love that. So your rep for Vista is Lauren Bennett. And so we support teachers and build community through these resources. Also, I just want to talk about a little personal project that I started during the pandemic, called, to try to bring the teacher community together. It's called Spirit of Teaching. And I have a podcast called Teacher Tales. And I invite teachers to come in and talk about their stories as an educator, to try to bring awareness to the outside world of what it's like to be a teacher. What are the challenges that you have? What are the successes? Why are you a teacher? What are the rewards and the celebrations, etc. And also, I find teachers are needing a little more inspiration and a little spark before they go back on Monday morning. So I have a newsletter you can sign up for too. And it's a lot of just inspirational sort of, words and resources and everything. So I appreciate everything for your attention and your time. And again, please reach out. Please reach out to me. This is my contact information. Also, reach out to Lauren. This is her contact information. And again, thank you so much. And I think I'm right on time.
Yeah, tremendous. Great job. So on behalf of PSMLA, we want to thank everybody for attending this session. We specifically want to thank Linda for all that she shared. This was an awesome presentation, and I really hope that this recording gets a lot of traffic as well. We welcome and encourage your feedback on our sessions, so you can use the link that's in the PDF program, or you can use the link that's in the chat. The recording of this session will be available to conference registrants after the event. And as a reminder for teachers of Pennsylvania, in order to qualify this session for Act 48 credit, you must complete the Act 48 reflection form. You can find the Act 48 form linked in the PDF program or in the chat. These forms should be completed within 72 hours of this session. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks,
everyone. Thanks, Rich. It was great.
All right, I'm gonna post those.